Hello! How are we doing? This is basically going to be a series documenting my kind of analysis, forecasts, models regarding different biotech and quite possibly just general, stock modeling, nascency. I am a complete novice, and hopefully, I'm not planning on anybody watching any of these, but it'll basically be a chronicle of my journey, trying to learn a little bit more about different companies, about different drugs, and looking into the different ways that you can analyze discount cash flows, and account for, basically value drug companies effectively based on their current portfolio and based on the probabilities that any of that portfolio actually gets off the ground and becomes, FDA approved, becomes commercially available. So, let's get straight into it. Biohaven, kind of a Wall Street sweetheart. I'm not so convinced. They've had a pretty big setback with Trurizol. Some would say, you could have seen it coming. They had, basically, they didn't have, their study didn't separate from placebo on the primary endpoint. And they kind of used a natural history study as well as the control. I'm pretty sure the entire process was open label. I think they were kind of saying that previously they'd been in alignment with the FDA. In terms of the kind of obvious drawbacks of this drug. But of course, I mean, it's an ultra rare disease that was being that it was targeting. So the disease being spinocerebellar ataxia. So very rare, life-threatening. But despite that, they received a pretty conclusive CRL. I've actually read the CRL, and the European Health Agency basically cited very much a lot of the same sort of concerns that the FDA pointed out in their CRL, in their kind of response to Biohaven withdrawing the drug. Anyways, so that was kind of a flop. I guess, you could have expected that, which leaves the rest of their massive portfolio. And of the interesting ones that they're keeping. Of course, they're, restructuring after this quote unquote setback. They are they've issued some shares. I think they've issued they issued like 27 million shares recently. Stock prices plummeted. But interestingly, I mean, I guess the bull thesis, the reason that I'm even here looking at this is they had huge insider buying of this stock offering. Like, if you have a look at this, right? I mean, first of all, like, this is kind of insane. I mean, show me one other company, one other stock, one other ticker that has like such overt, insider trading. Now, of course, and these guys were buying it. These guys were buying at 47. Jesus Christ, at 41, at 35. So they were pretty convinced. They were, well, it's slightly concerning because you would think that they were pretty convinced of this Tririlizole thing working out, right? I mean, it doesn't take a genius, right, to figure out that the price is going to plummet if Tririlizole fails, and if the price is going to plummet, and they're pretty confident in this. Maybe they wouldn't have been buying at these prices. I mean, of course, there's actual insider trading laws to contend with here, right? So they don't know anything. They don't know everything, but nevertheless, my point is that there's a lot of buying, and they've kind of doubled down. They doubled down here, and then now they're tripling down after this massive price move, and they clearly think that this portfolio has a ways to run, right? So, I mean, at the moment, it's about a $1.5 billion company. They have no drugs approved. The guy sold, I think, was it a migraine drug? Yeah, I'm pretty sure it was a migraine drug to Pfizer in 2022. And this is kind of the remaining portfolio that they have, and this is the downsized remaining portfolio. And in theory, this is the creme de la creme, right? So, like, in theory, these are the distilled kind of value opportunities that the company is looking at over the next 2-3 years, depending on all that. Right, okay, so now let's get down to brass tacks. That's enough waffle. I'm basically just going through the press releases, so we've got a pretty comprehensive list here, right? Like 29. I've worked through the Mode platform, Biohaven's Tautochroby, FDA Fast Track designation. I mean, this is when I think this is their only phase 3 drug, but it's failed in its primary endpoint recently. I think sometime in 2024. Like, if you look at the price, it kind of started. This is kind of the start of their decline. Is when when they announced this result. I mean, I don't think it has really any kind of causal effect on their rejection. I mean, I don't think there's any causal effect to do with that and their rejection on Tririlizole, but it was kind of the first thing that set off alarm bells, and let's see, maybe there is maybe there's something here. So basically, their Mode platform, they bought it from Yale. This guy, Professor David Spiegel, we can have a look at him. Psychiatrist, dude. Yale. Don't think he's a psychiatrist. He is a psychiatrist. Who is this guy? Chemistry, primary. New York City. Okay. Yeah, he looks... he looks pretty impressive. Not that I had any doubts about that to start with. Nevertheless, they bought this kind of mode platform from them, and that's in phase 1 at the moment, phase 1B. I'm not really sure what that means, so I'm going to look that up in a minute. Anyhow, so that's kind of that's their mode platform. This is something I presume, mid to long range. It doesn't seem like there's going to be anything getting approved on that front. I mean, of course, data is going to be data, and I should look into the mechanism and kind of the literature to do with mode in the future. But we're going to make our way through. So Talcroby Fast Track. This is their first. This is when the FDA fast-tracked SMA. So far as I understand, this hasn't really turned out very well. But from what I gather, Tadalafil is a symptomatic drug, right? So like it's basically, it's not there to treat the disease. It's there to treat. It's there to act as an adjunct to already established treatments for SMA. These things here. Novel mechanism of action. This is interesting, I suppose. It binds to free myostatin. And then, from what I understand, it binds to this free myostatin, which decreases the amount of myostatin in the blood. And then this new molecule then binds to an activin 2B receptor. And the activin 2B receptor is what, takes the myostatin, and that's what the myostatin binds to, and then prevents muscle growth. So it's kind of a double whammy, and they're claiming that this is novel. It certainly sounds interesting, and there's tentative results on the in terms of clinical trials. But I mean, just kind of looking at it, there is a plausible reason for thinking that maybe it is a useful kind of measure. And for all of you wondering, adenectin is like an antibody, but it's easier to produce. It's smaller, reduces immunogenicity, right? So that's kind of your immune response, because sometimes with these antibodies, what you can get is kind of a tertiary, or kind of a tertiary response from the immune system, right? Because these are immune cells. These are like IgG, whatever else, immune cells that you're kind of injecting into your system, and they are much more likely to elicit an immune response. Yeah, so it's just an antagonist, right? So it's a myostatin antagonist. Like, if you want the short and sweet version, that's what this thing is doing. Cool. So the thing that I've been looking into a little bit more is now this Alzheimer's nut drug. Now I know that Alzheimer's drugs get a pretty bad rap. Well, at least from what I've seen in the past short career of looking at these kinds of things. They're not very easy to treat. Now, this is something that they bought from. They bought this thing. Oh, they didn't buy it. Sorry, no, they didn't buy it. They licensed it from Hangzhou Leitengel Pharmaceutical Corporation, which we can have a look at this. But this is this is a Chinese pharmaceutical business, and it's, so far as I understand, Chris Liang. So this person, yeah, so he went to Princeton, chemist, and he invented these two things, which is interesting. We can look into this. Well, this guy seems pretty impressive, right? I mean, I'm sure he had other inventions that failed, but, you know, how many 1 billion plus annual sales of drugs has, you know, has the average biomedical inventor, quote unquote, invented? I mean, you know, your luck's got to run out at some point, but he does definitely seem pretty smart. Anyways, so again, like, this is coming from, it seems like it's coming from a pretty decent kind of management team. Chris Liang, Wikipedia, maybe there's anything on him. No. Chris Liang. Piece of shit. Right. Never mind. Okay. So let's look up some stuff about Janus kinase, right? So it's an enzyme family. Basically, from what I gathered so far, these are all kind of, immune system enzymes. Okay. Okay, that's tough. All right. So basically, small proteins that kind of stimulate cells to do different things without going into them. Immune system and inflammation. Depending on the cytokine. Yeah, so like it basically just tells the cell to do different things. So right. Yeah, I mean, this is quite important, right? Like, so dysregulated cytokine secretion is basically the motivation behind this whole drug. What they're saying is that, you know, there's evidence for saying that in neurodegenerative diseases, you know, Parkinson's, Alzheimer's, these are all due, at least in part, to this thing. This seems like the important bit. Cool. Okay. Basically, what I think this is kind of saying is there are some cytokines that require this these JAK enzymes to transduce, right? Like to have the desired effect, right? They require these intermediary things. What the fuck is a pad polypeptide? Alright, protein building block. No. So nothing to do with the brain. Might need some of these actually. Oh, 2014. Yikes. Not much came of that. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, if I'm not crazy, like dual inhibitor of TYK2 JAK1 offers wide therapeutic index. I mean, I presume that inhibiting all of these is probably bad, but I'm not convinced from this literature why. Anyways, to be honest, this is not really anything to go off of, right? Like, this is Wikipedia. this. We know what this is now. So basically, what is jazz kinase? It's an enzyme family. It contains these three enzymes. They regulate everything from cell growth to, cell death, cell adhesion, migration, and importantly, the immune system. And kind of on a slightly lower level, still quite hand wavy, they're there because certain kinds of cytokine require them to activate the downstream enzymes required for their, for signaling to take place and transfer phosphate groups from ATP to other proteins, right? Like, this is the mechanism. I don't know if this is particularly important. It could be. It's definitely interesting. This is interesting. So they're saying this is a brain penetrant dual inhibitor. So if this drug of theirs inhibits anything, JK3 is the thing that it should not be. Right, so these two things, basically it's these two things that they're inhibiting. And in theory, leaving these two unchanged, I mean, like, fundamentally this doesn't look too good, but these seem to be kind of already approved for different types of arthritis. So I presume there's, well, yeah, so in theory what they're claiming is it limits this, right? So it limits JK to JK3 inhibition. Yeah. So it could technically still do these two. It'll be interesting to look into the results from the clinical trials. I mean, right, like, I guess the whole premise of this is based around the fact that neuroinflammatory disorders can cause all of these various diseases. I know what interleukins are. Ah, white blood cells. Looks pretty convincing. Definitely dermatological. But like, are people receiving this drug? Who've been receiving this drug for rheumatoid arthritis and psoriasis? You know, are they less likely to get dementia? Is that what we're saying? Maybe. I mean, I don't know how this drug is administered. Right, like, is it a stretch to say that these drugs are going to have similar effect on the brain? You know, to reduce, you know, inflammation in the brain, as they do to reduce inflammation on the skin and everywhere else. Well, I don't know. Right, I mean, I guess their big addition is that this is brain penetrant. So they're gonna package this in a way that they can get it into your brain. What's Vlad saying? Waffle. So these were similar enzyme emitters, right? Inhibitors. Yeah, tyrosine kinase inhibitors. So this guy knows a thing or two about tyrosine kinase inhibitors, and JAK are indeed tyrosine kinase enzymes. Yeah, so they did this deal. I mean, this is all now slightly more part of the business end of things. The fuck is this thing called as well? Why can't they give it a proper name? I'm not gonna call it BHV 8000, I refuse. What a funky name as well. What the fuck is this? Why are there... Who puts two L's at the end of... I mean, like, they're going all in on this as well. You know, like, they're paying up. You know, so they paid 20 mil just for the rights to sell this thing. And even if they sell it, they're going to have to pay them up to 950 million. Now, you know, that's probably a good sign, right? Because that means that they expect to make a lot more from this. Right? I mean, they're smart people. They're not going to make bad business decisions, are they? Where the fuck did it go? It's a doctor. Dear God. The fuck is this as well for UI design? What, you want me to... You put a drop down and then I click on it. Anyway. Would you trust this guy with your brain? Yeah, I trust him with my brain. Tyrosine kinases. I think we're almost done. I'm gonna have another read of this. We might move on after that. To be fair, I spent most of my time on here, right? Yeah. What I might do in future is resize these two kind of things depending on what we're looking at, just to give you guys a better view. Right, final hurrah. That's the other thing I should probably put in here. That's already in there. I mean, my problem with this drug, and I don't think it's going to work, and that's a pretty big, that's a pretty big leap. Okay, well, no, I wouldn't say that. I wouldn't say that, actually. Um, I'd say there's maybe like a 50-50 chance for this, at best. Because I have no doubt, well, maybe I have some doubt, but before even looking at any of the, clinical trials here, inhibiting TYK2JK1, I'm sure it does that. But I think it's some stretch to then go out on a limb and say this. Of course, I'm sure there's a certain subset there's definitely at least a subset of, Parkinson's dependent patients whose diseases, well, maybe if not fully accounted for, because of this neuroinflammation, kind of an, overactive immune response, almost like an allergy, right? Much less than that, but almost like an allergy. I'm not convinced, and certainly they're also not convinced. I mean, they're pretty convinced. They put 900, yeah. well, they put 20 mil in for now, and probably at least another 30 into the clinical trials and so forth. So they're at least $50 million worth of convinced. You know, divide that by their total R&D spend over this time. You know, I don't know, maybe they're like 10, 20%. You know, let's say that this is like 10% of their R&D spend. You know, that should, just proportionally, that means that they're 10% confident, you know, that this thing's gonna work. And for it to work, I think you're going to have to identify very clearly in your patients with Alzheimer's and with Parkinson's and with whatever else they're looking for, that they have an overactive immune response. And that they have you know, chronic neuroinflammation. And if they can show, and if they can find that there's a considerable subpopulation, for which this drug actually does these things. I guess this is what the clinical trial is there to test. But I think that's what this is going to rest on, is whether it's not so much. I think I can buy this. Like, this guy's smart, right? This guy's a big brain guy. Chris Liang, Dr. Lang. He's invented some pretty big things, so I don't doubt that he can design a drug that does what he wants it to do. But this whole thing rests on the thesis that this is actually gonna drive down neuroinflammation, and driving down neuroinflammation is then going to meaningfully, clinically, statistically differentiate the population with reduced neuroinflammation from the population with placebo. The mechanism's certainly plausible, and I think that's kind of the conclusion that we should draw from this, is that the mechanism is plausible. It's not complete bullshit. But the thesis, as in the effect of this in reducing, and I understand that there's papers on this stuff, but I'm sure that, well, perhaps that's something else to look into. But I think what might be more worth it is going to be looking at the individual clinical trials and looking at all of that. So yeah. yeah, like this is my point, so these things have brought down, and um, inflammation in different places. Okie dokie. So that's all for today, folks. Sorry about the weird kind of layout going on here. We'll see what we can do about that next time. Overall, plausible mechanism of action. And we're going to move on to some more press releases. Hopefully we can get through these press releases pretty swiftly. They're not all going to take, several hours. If they do, they do. But we can move on, and we can move on to looking at some clinical trials for these different drugs currently in the works. And hopefully, in the far future, maybe even start discounting some cash flows and looking at coming up with some very rough probabilities of success for these different drugs, and kind of abusing AI to give us with some pretty wide margins of error, the kind of cash flows that we're talking about from each of these different drugs.